it's taking the basic process of imagining your future, imagining something that could happen, imagining good things that could happen or bad things, right? If you're trying to warn about bad things, right? Um, and then making that into a something that's in the real world, some image or some real formation that can be reproduced and communicated, right?
Yeah.
That's kind of the lowest level of what it is, right?
Yeah.
And so Ayn Rand understood like, well, if I'm trying to communicate my vision of the world, my vision of humans, my vision of people, I need to concretize it, right? And so that's what she did. And like, but the thing is, on the right, we have very few artists in general, and the ones who we do have, they aren't really
Good.
motivated by their philosophical vision. Well, they can be good. They can have technical talent, but generally they don't have like a concrete philosophical vision to present, or um and so they're kind of artists without politics. Whereas the leftists are artists with politics. They have a politics and they put it in their art, right? But and there are right wingers who do put politics in their art on occasion. It's something to get in, but it's
Yeah.
often disintegrated, it's disconnected, it's not really well formed, right?
Hmm.
Um, and in my case, um, I'm also trying to like set up that positive vision for the anarchist objectivist, right?
Yeah.
Like, what are the things in the world which we might want to aim for? What would we want to achieve, right? What are
Hmm.
things that are good, like that we can say that would be really cool that we could do, like that's something we could aim to do, right?
Yeah.
And that's what I'm putting out here, right? Like I think, this would be really cool, if
Yeah.
we built anarcho-capitalism on the moon, I'd be over the moon.
You,
Um,
you'll go over to the
I'd
moon.
go over to the moon. I would. I really would.
Yeah.
Yeah. So let's see. What do I got next on the
Yeah.
slideshow? Oh, I've got like a little. I've got the little timeline graphic I showed you the other day.
Hmm.
I did not add any more events to it. It's incomplete, but I can kind of give people the Cliff's notes on what the history, what the setting of New Astronauts is like. So, I'm gonna give the short version because I could yap for hours about this, but basically, there's basically three eras to this timeline. The first era, it starts like in the 90s, and there's a it's a slight alternate history where there's a greater global liberalization. There are some economic zones, and commercial spaceflight gets bigger, and it also ends up relating to there's a new kind of space race between the US, Russia, India, and China regarding the development of moon bases and moon facilities and orbital infrastructure. And there's a bit of a military component to it. There's a kind of like military competition in the new domain. And all of this kind of ends up putting more energy into the commercial spaceflight industry because each of these nations contracts out much of their like infrastructure to private businesses, right?
Hmm.
And obviously, the private businesses have their own interests in space as well. And so you end up seeing like, there's Artemis 1, which is the NASA moon base, and they are hiring like SpaceX or Amazon, and they are providing support facilities. They are processing material on the moon to build new structures. They're doing a bunch of industry, right? And that situation ends when the global like liberalization kind of goes down again when the different states enter like more hard military competition, which leads to World War III, which kind of collapses the world order. But by this point, there are these special economic zones which come to be called space cities because they are very tied in with the space industry, and they have like the surface to orbit launch infrastructure, and they're able to kind of defend themselves politically from the warfare by like negotiating well and having actually some kind of like credible military force of their own to be able to kind of defend themselves from threat. And so after the war, there's enough of this infrastructure left so that a lot of ambitious refugees who are not interested in any of the existing political orders after the war, because there's a kind of a huge collapse period. They're like, okay, I'm interested in political entrepreneurship. I want to start a new city, a new polity. I don't want to do any of these existing things. I want to seek my fortune somewhere where I won't be taken for granted. I won't be oppressed. And so these kinds of people go to the moon and they start their own polities. And that's where the first new astronauts come from. People who live and work in space and people who are seeking to like be, I don't know, citizens or people of space, right? They're not Earthlings who are visiting space. They are people who live in space. This is their home, right? And that's kind of the first era. That's also where we get what I call the space steaders, which is like seasteading but in space. And they go to the moon. They're like the libertarian faction of people who are doing a political community, intentional community on the moon. And likewise, there are a few different blocks. There's the Astro-Panslavists, which is Panslavism on the moon. There's the Fieldists, who are they're like the dissident right on the moon. They want to like revert to traditional forms of power structures, like lordship or like, but in a way that's meant to ensure investment and like reciprocal relations. And then there's the Lunarians who are the liberal socialists. They're like, we need technocracy, right, to fix our problems. And by the end of this situation, the Selenians end up winning out kind of this competition on the moon, and they end up incorporating these other communities in such a way that their descendant populations to intake the culture of the Selenians, right? The space that has become the Selenians. They have this like national genesis. They develop a culture beyond just their shared legal theory, and that culture spreads to these other populations who then become part of the Selenians. And the moon it becomes Ancapistan. Thank God, you know.
Yeah.
And then the second era, it comes on when there's this split in the Selenian movement, where basically the people who take on some of the Lunarian, not necessarily their philosophy, but their tendency for technocratic thinking, right? They're like, we need to solve this problem in an orderly and institutional manner, right? And maybe a little bit of their philosophy, right? Like in terms of, there needs to be some kind of ordering to the world to protect people, right? But they take on the Selenian natural law tradition, which is the Rothbardian tradition, right? And they say, okay, the national non-aggression principle is the root of law, but there's this notion of guardianship, and guardianship, you could imagine an institution that takes guardianship of the interests of the people in general, of the nation, of like the the polity, right? And that's what their conception of the state is, right? So they're like they are the minarchist, like heresy in New Nationalists, the Karandans, that's what they're called. They're the schism, and they decide they're going to go to the outer solar system. They're going to go to Saturn, the Saturn's moon Titan, and they're going to develop their minarchist like nation there by exploiting the hydrocarbon resources and like becoming very wealthy. And they succeed. They develop basically like they first start like a very successful like colony, like a business. Then they evolve it to a republic, which then incorporates like nearby colonies and territories until eventually they have like this imperial apparatus over like 100 years. They kind of develop this sort of American style liberal hegemonic empire between Mars and Neptune, right? Meanwhile, in the same time, the Selenians have been consolidating their situation on the moon. They've been industrializing rapidly. They've been getting extremely wealthy and developing advanced like institutional structures and relationships with the Earth powers, which have kind of recovered by this point. They have their own like there's like these states and then these pockets of like ancap in these space cities, like they are kind of these outposts of Ancapistan, and there's a complex political relationship there. And then there's also the relationship between Selene and Coranda, because there's a sense in which they are rivalrous, but neither side really wants to fight the other because they kind of view each other as like the misdirected brother, right? There's a
Mm.
kind of cultural view because like they're both like you shouldn't violate the non-aggression principle, right? And but the other
You know,
one the other one is like a minarchist and one of them is an anarchist, right?
yeah.
Um,
And this is very indicative of the relationship between the objectivist minarchists and our kind of people, right? Uh,
yeah,
in the sense that, and at least I view it like that, with the exception of certain crazies over there in their movement and certain crazies in our movement. At least the smart people, like take Michael Leibowitz, take someone like Inductica. I don't know if Inductica. Uh, from last I talked to him, he does like he still is a minarchist, but I have given him convincing arguments. So, you know,
yeah. I mean, there's a sense of curiosity and respect, and
oh
also but
yeah,
also like concern. Like it's like
yeah,
you should be thinking about the you should be thinking the right thing. This is why I'm going to give my
exactly.
argument.
So
But
there
they're
is
not gonna
certainly
like
this. Oh,
they're not
they're
gonna
the
beat you with that.
you
Yeah,
know they're the misdirected brothers,
yeah,
and like where the right and fair enough, because if you share, let's say, the most fundamental branches of philosophy, and the disagreement is in politics, and let's be honest here, the disagreement ain't much. you know
yeah.
you're gonna be they're gonna view each other as misdirected brothers at the end of the day, right?
Exactly, yeah. And so in the sense of the Karanians and the Athenians, their competition is probably a bit more tense because I mean, they're polities. Like the Karanians like they both have, military forces. In the Karanians case, they have like a state army, and the Athenians have the defense insurance industry, which has like its own private armies. And so there's the sense there's the tension of, oh, we both have military forces and we have opposed political goals in some cases. So are we going to go to war? And it's like, no, right? Like so, for instance, to give some context, like Selenian businesses do business in like Korandan territories, right? So they
Yeah.
have like a trading relationship like functional nations, right?
Mhm.
Um, and so, but there is this political competition between them because they have these opposed views of the correct application of natural law, right? They are like in a sense it's kind of like a conflict between the UK and the US, right? They both have
Yeah.
these both have a same English liberal English common law tradition,
Mm.
and they had this opposing view of how it's applied.
Mhm.
Um, and
And it,
that competition kind of changed over time. It kind of moved into an ally or like a satellite relationship as the power of
yeah.
each changed. The situation is different here because the Karandans they developed like an American style empire, but they
Yeah.
never actually have to fight like a war against the Selenians because the Selenians didn't colonize Karanda because the
Mhm.
Selenians don't have an empire, right? They don't have that kind of expansionist element to them, or at least not in the same way. They have that kind of cultural export element, but they don't.
Yeah.
They're never exporting like a military force to
Mhm.
occupy people because they're anarchists, so they
Yeah.
don't have standing armies, they don't have taxes, and
Mhm.
any venture of that kind has to be somehow profitable, right? For it
Yeah.
to be
And private.
existing,
I
right?
do
Private.
believe private ventures could exist, right? Like in
Yeah,
the sense that,
indeed.
yeah. And they
Private
probably,
military ventures to like topple a warlord is something that
yeah.
could happen, but on the institutional level, there has to be like more reasoning than it's legal and it
Yeah.
would be funny, right?
Yeah.
It's like how would toppling this warlord benefit our like enterprise
Yeah.
requirements? And also there is a sense in which like there's a public desire to finance the expansion of like Ancapistan, right? People want the rest of the world to end up that way. But there's also like, well, military action is insufficient because in order for Ancapistan to spread, you have to change the ideas of the population, right? The
Exactly.
remnant theory, right? And so
Exactly. And, you know,
yeah,
I recently
yeah.
visited, I recently visited the, I recently visited Vietnam, and there, like, it's very clear, like, there's a lot that I can say about it. Much of their narrative of the Vietnam War is propagandistic in the sense that it's lying by omission. It's going to be, oh, uh, like the US did 500 horrible things and we didn't do anything, you know.
We
So
never tortured anyone. I
we never done.
promise.
Yeah, you know. And so that it's certainly problematic. But one thing that the point really is very clear on is that the amount of bombs, vehicles in the clear sheer infrastructure against rice farmers there was there. And, like the Vietnamese were using World War I era equipment to fight the
Yeah,
Americans.
so like if I remember, I've done a little bit of reading or like well, watching lectures about this. So like
Yeah,
the thing is, I didn't used to know there were three Vietnam Wars in the 20th century. Well, there's
yeah,
more.
there were.
The three. There's the first Indochina War where the French are trying to retain Indochina as a colonial possession, and then they're like, okay, this is too much work, so they fuck off. And then the United States is like, okay, no, we need to prevent communism, so we're going to support the South Vietnamese government against the North, and that doesn't work, so they fuck off. And then the whole time in both the two previous wars, the Chinese communists were supporting the Vietnamese against the Western power, right? They were giving them training and funding and arms. But the third time in 1979, China was like, okay, now it's our turn to invade Vietnam, and they had this Sino-Vietnamese war. It's like so you help them repel two invaders, and you're like, now it's our turn to
Yeah.
test out the skill of our student, and they failed to take over
Yeah.
Vietnam. So what does that tell you?
Don't invade Vietnam. Try to convince the Vietnamese.
Never invade Vietnam. Exactly, yeah.
And
So
like
yeah.
uh, small tangent there, but like in the south of Vietnam, like much of the city people were actually pro-capitalist, and the communist insurgency it was in the countryside, which
Indeed,
it
yeah.
didn't work out for them because the countryside is just as poor as it used to be. I think it
Mhm,
probably has improved, but not. If they remain capitalist, it would have improved far more.
mhm,
But for all intents and purposes, it's not a good enough improvement for the time scale. But the city people, like which were capitalists, much of them moved to the US. So the US Vietnamese community is very right wing and very capitalistic. And
mhm.
the remnants of it in the South, there is this. It's now no longer a political issue, but the southern capital was called Saigon before, and
And
they
now it's
changed
Ho
it
Chi
to
Minh City.
yeah, it's Ho Chi Minh City now. And but you always like I always said Saigon when I was over there because just in case.
Your minor act of rebellion against the
Yeah,
communist regime.
exactly. Like just in case someone hears that and has some, you know, rebellion in their heart, and they're at least satisfied with that. That hey,
Uh,
potential ally. So like that
yeah.
that was my little homage to the capitalists of Vietnam back in the day.
Actually, that does remind me. That kind of loops me back to a point. I kind of want to bring this up later, but it's about the Selenians, right?
Yeah.
And their kind of composition as a people.
Mhm.
Because, as you mentioned, like a lot of the capitalist Vietnamese, they left Vietnam and they went to the US, and they're very red-pilled and based and capitalist, right?
Yeah.
So the Selenians, oh, well, like first let's talk about the space status. So the space status, they're not like from the US only. But they are all, like not all, but like the core group is like Rothbardians, right? Like
Yeah.
libertarians from across the globe. And obviously they're in international groups. They have varying different cultures, but they share the commitment to natural law. And the other thing is like, on the grounds that they share the commitment to natural law, they are all kind of outcasts in their own home societies, right? So even if they are carrying the culture with them, they are kind of alienated from the tradition, right? It's not like they're going to be like to be there and then they're going to carry over all of the same, I'm gonna use the word bigotries that their home
Yeah.
society had because they were a targeted minority. I'm kind of talking like a leftist here a little bit, but like if you understand my point, like
I do. I do.
if you're outcasted in your own society for your fringe political beliefs,
Mhm.
you're not going to carry on this. You're less likely to transmit those same like uh,
Idiocies of the society
orthodoxies,
abroad. Yeah.
yeah, from your
Mhm.
home culture. And that's part of what makes it easy for the space setters to undergo this kind of national genesis, to like actually kind of create not just be like a group of different countries who have like a group of different ethnic groups with different cultures who agree on one thing, but to actually
Yeah.
become one nation with like multiple ethnic groups who have like these different traditions, but they have these shared common values beyond just law, but also
Mhm.
like on topics like virtue
Yeah.
and shared like social traditions,
Yeah.
shared linguistic norms, shared ideas of, right and wrong and what is good literature, and shared heroes, like shared like things that are shared between them that are not even legal or like philosophical, but like just cultural products. Like there's a heritage that they share to each other, right? That's what makes them like
Silly.
into a
Yeah.
nation, yeah, right? And it's important because
Mhm.
the Selenians, there's a kind of tendency on the right, which is like even if you're not in the like post-liberal tradition, to think about like monoethnicism as an important element of like a nation, or like the idea that having the leftist idea of diversity being not like having a diverse nation is not possible in some way.
Yeah.
And um, the Selenians are kind of my answer to that, um, almost accidentally, because I kind of modeled the Selenians off of my time in Australia. I'm a Serb, but my family immigrated here to Australia. And Australia, like I live in Sydney, which is
Mhm.
I'm not doxing myself, but like there's like 5 million people here, and there's a lot of immigrants from different backgrounds. And obviously, there's some strife between immigrant groups. But in general, I experience a life where most immigrants to Australia consider themselves Australian very rapidly. They kind of develop this attachment to the Australian culture
Yeah.
and to Australian identity. To a lesser or greater
Makes
extent, depending on the
sense.
person.
You know,
Um,
it really
and
does make sense
yeah,
because, like, from what I have seen in immigrant trends throughout the world, like you look at the Irish, right? The Irish, and this is the difference between empire and immigration. Like there are more Irish in America than there are more Irish people in America than there are in Ireland. And the Irish people in America never wanted their own Irish nation. They became Irish Americans, right?
exactly, yeah. And
The
part
British
of
could,
it is,
like the
yeah.
British occupied and were legitimate holders of Ireland, legitimate, of course, but they were kings of Ireland from time immemorial. And still the Irish are like, okay, we're going to fight you. There's this song in which there's this Irish rebel song, which says lyrics, we've fought you for 800 years and we'll fight you for 800 more. And, so that's the difference between, immigration and empire. And
Yeah.
with minor differences such as, certain, recently there is a wave of uh, extremism in Islam. So certain Islamic immigrants might have more trouble blending in. But even then, like, let's be honest here, like, with very few pockets of people which are, you know, very problematic, a person from a random Islamic country is probably more likely to integrate than not. But of course,
Yeah,
like,
and I mean,
You know?
There's the case. I consider the case against like radical Islam to be a case against radical religion rather than a case
Yes,
against
yes.
Islam.
And
Because
Islam is a particularly innovative religion at that because it had seen a lot of iterations of religion. It's the
I mean
newest religion,
it's
you know?
novel.
Yeah,
It's younger as far as religions go.
yeah,
And like it's like version 3 of Judaism,
yeah.
right? Um that's
I have a Muslim friend and I often annoy him with this. You know,
I can't. I hope my Muslim friend isn't watching this podcast because he's gonna hear that and he's gonna DM me like you fucking asshole. But you know, and
I call
the other
him
thing
a
is like
second derivative Jew.
that's one thing. That's one thing that like kind of inoculates me against like the full writing off of Islam as like completely like irredeemable. Because like in Australia, there are lots of Muslims, right? I went to work. Like, I worked as an electrician in construction trades, and like I think like half of the guys who did concrete and like brickwork
Mhm,
or like they're just like they're from Lebanon or they're Muslims or whatever, and like well they're just guys. They're literally just dudes, right?
mhm.
They don't have any problem with me or anything. Like
Yeah,
they have like certain religious commitments and they basically their relationship to Islam is almost the same as the relationship of a modern like liberal Christian's relationship to Christianity in that
yeah,
it's their religious commitment in a liberal society where they understand their religious commitment is not a political commitment, right?
yeah. Mhm.
And like I think that's part of the vision in this lenient society. It's not like a because it's a multi like it's a society that's developing. I imagine that it secularizes over time, but there are different religious groups in this lenient like melting pot, I might say, right? There's Muslims, there's Christians, there's Jews, there's the whole Judeo-Christian family, Abrahamic family, I guess I'd say, and minority religions and cultists. We're gonna have the Scientologists in there. We can't leave them out.
Yeah,
I'm not writing a story about that.
yeah,
But yeah, and like, but one thing is, I think as over time, the as like the broader Selenian monoculture kind of develops and like um shapes the constituent groups over generations, there's like a trend towards secularism, and that's like kind of one thing. This is another tangent. I'm gonna kill this tangent very like soon after I say, but like that's another problem with modern science fiction is that its depiction of secularism as basically like Reddit atheism, which is
yeah.
like you're so tiny in this broad universe, but it's okay as long as have fun or whatever. It's like
Mhm.
no, we want like Aristotelian, Ayn Rand, like objectivist, like you are a hero in this universe. There are great things in store for you if you take your life into your own hands, kind of secularism. And like there is right and wrong in the world because you are a living creature that has requirements for your life, for the proper exercise of your life, right? That's the kind of secularism that kind of I'm trying to push forward, right? Anyway, I'm on slide 5 of 20. I'm gonna move into the next
Yeah,
slide. Um, although this slide is pretty easy. This is just, I mean, we've kind of covered most of this. I'm just talking about Celine, the nation, right? So I've talked a bit about this already. So we've kind of already covered that a little
yeah,
bit. And the next slide is also Coranda. I mean, I have, you can see the flags here. So the flag design here, I did this on a whim. So the one on the right here was the first one. It's just green and blue, right? Bicolor. And the reason I picked that, I just like the colors, but also I kind of retroactively decided like the Selenians are on the moon, and the moon is famously gray. It's got one color, right? And it's not a very pleasant color. But what the Selenians end up doing when they build their habitats and they build their like space stations and whatever, they build lots of green spaces, lots of parks, right? And I've developed this vision further as I understood like Zulu's relationship to the environment and his talk about how parks they're an artificial environment.
mhm,
So the Selenians take that to heart. They have a very kind of Promethean view of their relationship to I need a word that's not environment, but like green spaces,
mhm.
spaces that have the elements of nature on Earth but are under control. They are an engineered thing. They are completely artificial in this lean economy. They created them. They have like professions of engineers, ecological engineers, whose job it is to build parks, design them, right, from the ground up and like construct them. And that is an achievement on the part of that society because it's good for your psychological health to see the colors green and blue in your environment. Let's be honest, right?
Yeah,
And that is something that they did. They went to this airless, like completely hostile environment that is like that human beings would die instantaneously without technology, and they they built the environment that is comfortable for humans. And then obviously we have the gold and black stripes or chevron for ancap, you know.
Mhm.
That's another that's another standard. I might
Yeah.
make variants because you know I'm
I
other
want to
variants
ask
because
something about Celine. So, it becomes a nation, right? It becomes a nation of unified identity.
indeed.
Is there a unified polity, or is it simply distributed?
So what I would say, I think I described the history of the moon earlier. There's basically the four big blocks. There's the Astropanslavists, the Space Setters, the Lunarians, and the Fieldists, right? And um, and obviously these groups also have their own constituent ethnic groups. So like there's like Lunarians, largely Chinese, Russian, and like East Asian, Southeast Asian, and European. That's kind of like their pot, right?
Yeah.
Um, the space setters are often American or they're like American transplant ethnics. And there's obviously like, various groups from around the world where there were space cities. So like there's Indian groups there, there's Japanese, there's some East Africans, some like Argentinians, like like South Americans. Like there's a lot of I just throw everyone in there, honestly. Anyone who I want, I just put them in there, right? And obviously they all have their constituent ethnic groups and they bring in their traditions. And then they have these like four blocks even after the Selenian nation, right, like forms in the space that is, and then they come to integrate the other blocks. The blocks kind of retain not a separate identity, but they do retain certain like unique traditions to themselves. Traditions that are not like contradictory to the Selenian identity or the Selenian monoculture, but like it's the same way like, people from New York and people from pick a different city, Texas, have different traditions. They have a different identity, but they both have a common American identity. They have a common American monoculture to them, right? Um, and so that's the same way it ends up being on the moon. Now, as
Mhm.
a polity, there is a so because of their ANCAPs, there's no state. But what it means to be a Selenian in the very like narrowest sense, uh, for like a city, like a habitat, what it means is that it is under the rules of natural law, right? So the accepted law, the accepted court there is natural law, and also for it to be properly Selenian, it has to be in the vicinity of the moon, because
Mhm.
otherwise you're just an ANCAP who's not
Yeah.
on the moon. You know,
Yeah.
you're an ally, but you're not under what's called the Selenian Aegis, right? Aegis, right? That's kind of like the formal term for people who accept natural law and are on the moon, right? And then there's like the Selenian cultural spread, which is like it's strongest at the space that are like core habitats, because that's where like the original culture kind of formed, and that's where it's most uniquely Selenian there, right? And then if you go to the Astro-Panslavist territories, you'll end up seeing like there's obviously like a lot of Slavic tradition that survives there. There's like that's where you see Orthodox Christianity and like obviously the Croats have their weird Catholicism. Who knows what they're on about, right? And the inter-Slavic language is stronger there than it is anywhere else, right? But they also they accept. I wrote something down about this where basically everyone understands the same virtues, but they have different expressions for those same virtues, right? Um, they have different language, but they all talk about courage, right? As a valuable, virtue, right? So that's it's the same sort of way, right? Like they have their different expressions for the same thing.
It's
Uh,
the frontier spirit.
exactly.
Yeah.
And uh, that's what it means in terms of. Do you have a specific question about like what it means to be a polity?
Yeah. So what I was imagining is that if we remember uh, ancient Iceland, there was a common parliament. And what made that place not an ANCAP was that there was no free entry into the common parliament,
Mm.
right? So, and I was imagining this that uh, even under natural law, and this is an argument I'm not too strong on. So, this is simply just brewing in my head. I need to write it down. So, even under natural law, there is a good argument for having a common polity, like a common, let's say, dispute resolution authority,
Yeah,
sort of
like a
speak.
representative structure that like is like we are a group of people. We're like let's say okay, I'll explain this for the Selenians, right? Because that's going to be useful. So,
Hmm?
in the earliest sort of like um parts of like the space that are and like lunar colonization, the general political structure that many habitats like cities end up ending up using is what's called an assembly, right? And basically, what happens is the colony is made up of different like properties, right? But if they're all tied together, then everyone who's a property owner has a seat at the assembly, and the assembly is everyone like it is basically a democratic, not necessarily democratic, but it's like a congress, right, or like
Yeah.
a town hall, right, or I drew it from the Acadian parish assemblies, right, is
Yeah.
where like everyone in town who owns property goes here and we discuss issues that are common to our interests, right, and then one level up. So let's say you and the next neighboring habitat have common interests, and like there's a third one who you also have common interests with. So
Mhm.
what you do is each assembly is like, okay, we have common interests with these people, and let's send a delegate to each of these assemblies, and we'll form an alliance. So we have a three habitat alliance or whatever, right?
That's what I
And
was thinking. That's
yeah,
what the emergent order of it
there's an
would
emergent
look.
order, right? It's
Yeah.
bottom up. So what happens is this alliance, then there's other alliances nearby, and they are like, okay, let's form like a meta alliance, like our
Mhm.
alliance is an alliance now, right? And so it kind of goes up that way, and it's sort of like an upper limit. So usually you go like two alliances up, and then you're just going to enter like a global, security framework. So you end up kind of forming like natural, like counties, and then provinces, and then like NATO or something, right?
There's something,
And
really important to point out here is that, like, there's something we've noticed is that, you know, universal philosophies often end up with they often do end up with universal polities in the sense that, what do the socialists want? They want the world, they want the world common form, right? And
exactly.
similarly to ANCAPs, in the sense that we do sometimes play into nationalism because we want decentralization, but
Mhm.
like the ultimate goal would be like a global,
Cosmopolitan nationalism,
exactly,
the
a
nation of
cosmopolitan.
everyone.
Yeah, yeah, that for sure.
Yeah,
Like, the common human spirit that we aspire to, right?
yeah.
And
The nation of heroes, I think, in a
yeah,
sense. Like that's kind of what the Selenians end up aiming at, is like everyone who is here and devotes themselves to like these virtues, like these good things in life
yeah,
can be Selenian. That's part of like what they import from the American idea, like anyone who comes to America, the thing that people like Sam Hyde really don't like. America is just a bunch of values. It's a values-based nation. He doesn't like that. Well, too bad. That's what it is.
mhm,
If you don't like that, maybe you're not an American. He's not. He's really not gonna like that.
yeah. And see, and we are of course two non-Americans, but similarly, an ANCAP on Earth wouldn't be a Selenian, but at least one could say spiritually he's more Selenian than
Yeah,
America's Selenian, right?
they have common cause because the other element of being a Selenian is that you live in a particular place, right? You live in Selene,
Yeah,
and you are a participant in the Selenian like national culture, right?
yeah,
Like in the national, the values held by that nation, right?
exactly. Yeah,
Likewise, we might be spiritually American because we are deeply holding American values, but because we're not in America yet, we can't really
we're not
we can't get to call
we're
ourselves
not
that. So
Americans in such
when
like
we immigrate,
yeah,
inshallah, God willing, right, that it happens,
yeah,
then we will become Americans, right?
yeah.
But not yet. And so, one thing I want to elaborate on, there's actually a plot line about this. There's a narrative about the Selenian like alliances and polity situation. So, the very first Selenian like I guess alliance, big one, is it's formed. It's actually it's co-existent to the like origination of the term Selenian, right? It's all the way back when they're the space status and they're dealing with the Lunarians and they're about to have a war, right? They form what's called CODA, the Coalition Operational Defensive Alliance, right? It's an alliance between the core habitats and a bunch of other ones, so they can fight against the Lunarians, right? Who are going to attack them, invade them, right?
Mhm.
And it's around that time, like that's also the time that Selenian nationalism kind of gets on the bandwagon, and like it they come up together. The thing is that CODA ends up collapsing as an institution because it's a voluntary membership, like defensive alliance, and the administration of that alliance ends up being disconnected from the desires of the membership of the alliance. And it's a big moment because in our own history, in American history, what happened was the Union became pre-existent over the constituents of that union, right? Like the states are now like they can't depart from the union by their own volition, right? Obviously, they're states in the first place, so there's a problem there. But like, but in the case of the Selenians, Coda gets disassembled without a civil war happening. Like the membership just kind of keep like withdrawing until the whole thing unravels because there's no one paying membership dues to the administration, so it stops existing.
Yeah.
And it's around that time that the new Selenian defense architecture kind of rolls into gear, which is defense insurance companies kind of become a big element. They kind of become like the non-geographic element there, where what will happen typically is you'll have like a habitat, like a city or like an orbiting like city or something, and that will have like some corporate property arrangement, which will be, it's not like common property, but it's like it's contractually bound in a number of significant ways. And then the corporate administration of the station will hire a defense insurance agency to insure it. They're like, please make sure that we are safe from everything between like petty crime to terror threats, right?
Mm.
And and give us the premium for that, and also institute the measures that would reduce our premiums, right, by having like security measures, right? And they're like, okay, and so they um they hire defense insurance, and defense insurance is non-geographic. Like it doesn't have a specific like jurisdiction. Um, it's just where they get hired. But they are a Selenian institution, right? And they cooperate with each other, as much as they compete.
Yeah.
Um, and so that's kind of your like top level of the hierarchy. And then you have like alliances. They kind of become parallel institutions to an extent. So like you have like the assembly. Assemblies are not redundant because there's still like property owners who have common concerns, but you end up having these like corporate institutional arrangements, sometimes like private cities, right? Where instead of having like a group of different property owners, you have this city which is owned by one guy under like a bunch of contractual obligations to other people, so he has to fulfill certain functions on behalf of like the corporation. So then it's administered by like a company, and they rent out plots or they sell plots like a condominium, like a condo, right? A condo corporation.
Yeah.
And that way it has like a single vision to it. And that is, it's more like Singapore, except based in ancap,
Yeah.
right? And so these become sort of like parallel institutions in Selenian society and they relate to each other.
And
And the overall security
one can
architecture.
one can imagine this instead of simply a rationalistically put together state apparatus. Oh, we just sat around in a bunch of rooms and we just came up, oh, there's going to be only three levels of government, no more, no less, right? And we're going to have only three levels of court systems, no more, no less. And it's going to be the same court system, and we're going to select the judges the same way. And how do we know that this is the best way possible? We don't, right? We're just
We
making,
figured it out. We platonically inferred that it's the
yeah.
best government.
Exactly. Like that's what they're gonna say in eventually. Like if they try to justify it, but if they're like honest, they're like we're just like kind of guessing it. We're
Yeah.
throwing. It's the economic calculation problem. You don't have a market, you don't know, right?
Well, one thing is like it's you can appreciate what the founders had difficulty with because when you're
Yeah,
making a decision on behalf of an entire like nation against their will to some extent, right? Because you're building a state,
yeah,
but you have this like kind of moral concern to defend their liberty, then it becomes very important to you to try to get it right, and it's very stressful. It's like, well, we can't do this wrong, so we have to do this right the first time, and we can't change it because if you change it, you're playing with the apparatus of coercion, right? You're playing with the apparatus of aggression, which is dangerous to liberty, right? On the other hand, in the new astronaut situation, in the Selenian situation, it becomes really easy to change institutions because none of the institutions have the power to aggress on people. That's always illegal.
mhm,
And so the only thing that you're like fundamentally limited by is the change to my institution going to violate some contract I have, or is it going to aggress on someone, right? But apart from that, if there's some arrangement that is probably better and you can convince enough other people, you can change your habitat to run like that. So one thing I've considered playing with, right, is that there could be a so in the modern contemporary time, most Selenians live on orbital stations that orbit the moon, right? Because they get to spin and they get to have like proper gravity. And the moon is kind of like a big rock where lots of mining happens. It's kind
mhm,
of like Western Australia is to the rest, like the urban centers of Australia, right? So I live in Sydney. Western Australia is like mostly a barren wasteland filled with mining pits, but it's way bigger. It's like what
yeah,
you see. right? And so like the urban population of Selenians, they live on the space stations that are orbiting very close to the moon, right? And what one idea I had played was like, what if there's a orbital station, like a habitat, which is run similarly to the Federation from Starship Troopers, where in order to be granted residence by like the Covenant community, right, you have to engage in some kind of like military service on behalf of the station, right? Like you kind of you have to join the company as like a security personnel, right? And that way it demonstrates your commitment to the values of that station, right? To the values of that community. It's like you
Yeah,
could do that, right? That's one possible arrangement. I'm like that's an interesting idea. I don't know where I would fit it into a story, but it sits in my brain, And so like that happens all the time, I imagine, in this lean context because like in each case, right, for different communities they have different needs, right?
yeah.
And so different needs
And
then emerge in different
oftentimes,
institutions.
oftentimes, like the modern statist institutions, there are almost bad analogies to what might actually exist, like in a free society.
Yeah, that's another thing. Like
Yeah,
one thing I imagine when I write the Selenians is like I sometimes take like what if we had this American state institution and we only deleted aggression from it. So
yeah,
for instance, like what if we took the CIA and we only made the CIA we took the CIA and all we did was we made it not violate the NAP, but everything else it did was a function that it continued function it performing. It's like collecting intelligence on foreign adversaries or conducting operations to assassinate terrorists or like doing all these things. These things are legal. They might not be profitable, which is why the CIA might fail as a company. But you could imagine some combination of the things that the CIA does could be profitable in the right context. Because like suppose that you're trying to defend your space city. Well, obviously, it would be in your interest to be aware of potential terrorist threats against it. So there is probably some business model for an intelligence company, and I have a depiction of that in the Selenian context. It's called Levi-Rook Defense Intelligence Company, right? That's kind of like
yeah.
the Selenian CIA, the ancap CIA,
Yeah. And,
right?
you know, we did talk about this, but interventionism as such is not necessarily a bad thing. It's like, let's think about the Vietnam War intervention. So,
Mm,
uh, the capitalist US, capitalist, but let's go with it.
yeah,
The capitalist US supported the capitalist South Vietnamese or more capitalist South Vietnamese
mm,
against the communists of North. Sounds good so far.
yeah.
Where did the problem begin? Number one, how did they fund the war? Well, that's through theft.
Invasion
So
or stealing.
that's a problem. Number two, uh, you know, how did they? What do you say? How did they get the men to fight the war? That's
Yeah,
conscription. So that's slavery. So that's a problem. You know. Number three, how did they actually fight the war? Well, they used chemical agents and bombs a lot. So that's mass aggression. You know.
and there's also like the meta level of like what is their theory of victory, right?
Yeah.
It's if we fight the enemy army sufficiently well, we can defeat them in combat, which is it just is not a correct model of the situation because the enemy army is not an organized group of people. It's a population which doesn't want you there. And so if you're trying to maintain the population but defeat the enemy army, you're going to fail by
Yeah.
default, right?
Exactly.
Um,
And
so
perhaps retreat to
yeah.
the places that want you there and stay there.
That's
Perhaps
yeah,
make
that's the
yeah,
thing.
perhaps
So
make a city state out of Saigon instead of trying to
exactly.
hold all of South Vietnam. You
And
know?
so that's something that I try to depict in this leaning context is this sort of like because I have a very deep anti-war like sentimentality to me. I'm
Oh,
very
me as well.
like I'm very Scott Horton like, in some sense,
Yeah,
I really don't like seeing people get exploded all the time. I
for
mean, my
sure, for
family,
sure. It's the most,
yeah,
like the way I say is that in in dealing with people, even if you think that they're really, really bad, you got to really avoid war unless and until it's the last alternative.
yeah. Because
You know?
there's like two questions, right? When it comes to the question of like, let's say should we overthrow Saddam Hussein and we're the moon, we're Ancapistan, right? Like the one question is like, is it legal to overthrow Saddam Hussein? Which is yes,
For sure.
because he's guilty of murder and you can prosecute him on someone's behalf, right? I'm sure there's at least one Iraqi who'd be like, I would like Ancapistan to blow up Saddam Hussein, right?
Yeah.
And that's enough justification for like someone to prosecute Saddam Hussein on that person's behalf, right? Because they are delegating their right to like retribution, right?
My
And
hair is looking unreasonably good today. Do you think so as well?
I think so too. Yeah, you got
Like, I
the
don't know what
the,
I did. I
the
just took a
luscious
shower.
hair.
Continue, continue.
Yeah.
Good.
I have to do like hair gel because otherwise my hair will just like sit here, and it's just like flat and it's not very good. Um, what was that? Oh yeah, but then there's a second question, right? Like, is it prudential? Is it prudent to overthrow Saddam Hussein? And the answer is probably not, because even if it's justified, like from a purely legal perspective, the killing of Saddam Hussein is not going to improve the general social situation in Iraq, because
Yeah.
Saddam Hussein is not the fountain of the problems that the Iraqi people are facing. He is like a face of that problem, but the general problem that the Iraqi people are facing in the situation, like when Saddam Hussein was still alive, right? Because he's not alive now. He's resting in Tikrit. Um, uh, um, the general problem they were facing has much more to do with the fact that Baathism, Iraqi socialism, well, Arab socialism, is the ideology that is ascendant, right? And that's not going to change just because you drove in there and blew up Saddam Hussein. What will change is that the other ascendant ideology that it might be there is going to rise up, which is like the Iranian Shiist, like Shiite,
Mhm.
whatever. There was a kind of a
Exactly.
minority ruling over a majority in Iraq in terms of
The,
like
the
the
kind of
Sunni
premise
Shia.
is, you know, the
But the
kind
problem
of
is,
premise.
in general,
Go ahead, go ahead.
defeating them militarily did not change the available ideologies to take the gap. That's the problem.
Yeah. And,
Yeah.
there is this kind of premise that, which is the premise of nation building, right? Uh,
Mm.
which is something that I do not think truly capitalist powers would give a shit about. Like, yeah, if you,
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure if you just went into Iraq and you took every child below the age of 10 away from their parents and just, like blasted them with Rothbard, yeah, you're gonna get a lot of ANCAPs out of that. you know, like,
We're gonna have the ancap brainwashing drones. They're gonna be flying over Baghdad. They're gonna be playing the audiobook of Anatomy of the State in in Arabic
yeah,
constantly at all hours of the day.
but what's that gonna cost? And the reason nation building, even as a concept, is feasible is because the state has, like it's other people's money that you're allocating. If I am paying for money, wouldn't I rather just do other things with it? Like that, there are probably
Yeah.
more productive uses of that money, even if we just limit our vision to, one day having a free Iraq, right?
Yeah, so we might get into this in more detail later, but when I depict Selenian interventionism and like political adventurism, like attempts to like change the outside world to be more ANCAP like, or like military, like, just general military action outside their borders, there's basically like three, well, not just military action, but there's basically like three expressions of like what I would say is like the effects on the outside world in terms of like politics, right? And two of them are largely defensive. So one of them is like the intelligence assets who are checking on threats, who like threats to the Selenian nation or like threats to this habitat, like making sure the terrorists that we know where they are, and if they're planning something that we know that we can stop them, right, and that we can do something about it, right. And then
Yeah,
the number two is where Selenian defense insurance makes a contract with someone who is like amenable to Selenian values that is not in Selene. So like there's a story where there's like a plantation in Australia where they hire Selenian defense insurance to defend them from like criminal gangs.
yeah,
Like, and that's a situation where they are making a business decision, right? They're like, we can profit from this arrangement with these people who might share our values to some extent, right? As well, right? Because obviously the Selenian defense insurance agency is not going to defend like a criminal group on the grounds that they would potentially be criminally liable in Selenian court, right? Someone could take them to court over that, right? Which would not be great.
yeah,
Not great. And not great for your reputation either, right? So on the other hand, but like if there's some group that aligns with their values and it's going to be profitable to defend them in some way, then they would go there and they might defend them, right? And then the third thing, which is not purely defensive, but it's also not really military, is cultural exports, right?
that's
Selenians,
the greatest thing. Like that, that's actually how you change the world.
it's the remnant strategy writ large. It's like the
Yeah,
if if America was Ancapistan, you would imagine that like instead of having like $1 trillion military budget, it would have a $1 trillion propaganda budget
and
and
and, and believe me,
privatized propaganda.
the flawed America already does this to an extent. You know,
Yeah, indeed. There's
the,
a
the
huge
problem is
American like
what
uh
goes out of America to the rest of the world goes through the lens of two things, the universities and Hollywood, right? And
That's the
so,
thing that the cultural producers have been captured by
yeah,
anti-Americanism. So
but
America no longer
it's
really
important.
exports
It's
its
important in one
its
sense,
own.
in the sense that even these universities and Hollywood, evil as they are still American. So
Indeed.
there is literally a remnant of individualism there, which is being exported to the world. You know,
The
like,
remnant,
yeah,
the
there's a
American
remnant.
remnant. It cannot be
There's
destroyed.
and you see this in the sense that, uh, like people who want to, like, let's say India, it's a very repressive society, right? But because people see certain American movies, because people see certain things, and there are some good American movies, right? Uh, Even if the overall
Some.